You're listening to the Challenge and Choose Radio Network. Now your host of your show, Chad Butler.
Welcome, Challenge and Choose Nation. We thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Chad Butler. And of course, we have with us today producer Jake. Jake, how we doing?
Always amazing, especially on the Challenge and Choose.
Nice. Well, thanks for coming out to the studios today. It's wonderful weather here in Austin, Texas, right before the holiday season. I hope you're all ready for the holidays.
Absolutely. Just got back from vacation. My wife kind of takes care of everything throughout the year, so
yeah,
it's pretty easy around the holidays.
I tell people I'm the most organized guy in the world when it comes to the holidays. I just have my wife do all of it.
Me too.
And she's the most organized person I know, so
it works out.
Thus it works. I'm a great delegator with that. So awesome. Well, as you know, listeners, we have been doing a series on what it takes to become a 1%er in business and in life. We've had some previous shows that I thought were amazing. I learned a lot from these shows, and so I hope you listeners have learned a lot from them. I've re-listened to the last two about 3 times each because it was so applicable for me personally. The first one's my favorite, which is the impact on becoming a 1%er. To me, the number one thing is the belief. Obviously, if you're a 20%er in business, whether it's sales or just running a business, and you deal with the general public, to me, what you believe about yourself, what you believe your capacity is everything. Because a 20%er is someone who already knows how to work. They've got the work ethic typically. They know how to close. They know how to open. They know how to communicate with people. And so I have found that the difference between that 20%er and a 10%er or a 5%er or a 1%er is all about belief. The number one thing without question. I have worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in sales, thousands of businesses, and without a doubt, to me, that's the most important thing. Another thing that hinders people in their progress of making those leaps is fear and the stories we tell. And that was a tremendous show that we had with a good friend of mine back in Utah. His stories about the stories he told and what limited him, and then by changing the story, how, in his words, catapulted him and put him on a completely different trajectory. So we're going to add to this list and talk about what the importance of finding your sweet spot, living within your genius, living within your passion in your industry, or finding what that passion is. We've talked a lot about this, Jake. I mean, I know both of us have shared we didn't have the spikes in our career until we really found our niche and what we were doing. And today, I'm really excited to introduce to you someone who I've known for over 2 decades, a person who lives as a 1%er to a T in business. And he and I have kind of grown up from the time we were wet behind the ears to our peaks and our valleys and our peaks. And I'm really excited to have him here today. Our guest here is going to be Steve Swenson. Steve Swenson is the author of the best-selling book, The Bucket Bliss, or just straight Bucket Bliss. He is the creator and founder of a platform called The Last Advisor. Steve, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Good. I'm doing real good, Chad. Thanks for having me.
You bet. It's a pleasure to have you on. We've known each other for so many years. I don't even know where to start with stories. I mean, we could do 30 different shows together, I think.
We sure could, and some of them will be more interesting than others. Absolutely.
Some might not be quite PG, and some will be even better. Well, thank you for coming on today. I mean, every one of the shows that we've had, you could be my number one guest on. And your stories and the path you've taken is just picture perfect for what it means to become a 1%er. But to me, I think the sweet spot for you as a guest today is just that, your ability to finding your sweet spots in business and how that catapulted you to what you're doing today. So before we get started, Steve, tell us what you're doing today.
Well, listen, as you know, I've been a financial advisor for 20 years, and that business is a very tough one to break into. We've all heard the statistic that 95% of advisors that start in this business fail in the first 5 years. And so I can't lie to you. There were many times I thought I was going to be one of those 95%.
Sobering, absolutely.
It really is. But I just remember early in my career not being able to relax at night when I would come home. I couldn't ever relax until I knew that nobody would see me, and that was generally about 10 p.m. And because I didn't want to go to sleep and have it start over again, I would stay up until about 2 a.m. just kind of to hold on to that peace and tranquility that I had been seeking all day long. And but of course, when 2 a.m. would roll around, I'd realize, listen, I'm going to be tired tomorrow. I need to get in bed and start this thing over again. So it was that fear really that drove me to find the part of my business that I loved. Now, I had put in a lot of work in my career and in the industry. I didn't want to leave that, but I did want to find that part of the business or that part of my career that I was good at. Not only was I good at it, but I liked to do, or I loved to do. And so as I went on a hunt for that piece of my business that I loved and was good at, it led me from one insurance company to another, ultimately to an independent broker-dealer, a broker-dealer that didn't have proprietary products that they encouraged me to sell. But I ultimately found the chassis or the framework that allowed me to work with that part of my business, that part of my career, that skill set that I had, that genius that you speak of, to really find that sweet spot and to watch it grow.
So, Steve, you bring up an interesting point. You kind of you mentioned jumping around a little bit from one company to another, looking for that sweet spot. You and I spent a lot of time together, seeing a lot of people come and go, and everyone had their reasoning of whether they were part of the 95% or the 5%. You kind of lived as the 5% there for a while. And found that you just weren't enjoying being part of that 5%, meaning being on the verge of not making it as a result of either not finding what you were passionate about within it. Tell us about what were your stories when you were kind of living as that 5% before you found, some of these sweet spots. What were your stories, and what was the fear, and what was preventing you, do you think, ultimately from being open to finding your sweet spot?
Well, I think in this business, or any commission-based sales business, there tends to be this belief that you need to be all things to all people, as long as it creates any kind of revenue. And so I would be all things to all people. I would promise one thing to a client, even though in my heart of hearts I knew that's not what I'm good at, that's not what I want to do. I would tell them I would do it, and therefore my word necessitated me following through and doing what I didn't want to do. And so I remember looking at my schedule one week, and if you looked at my schedule and saw the agenda for every meeting, you would have no idea that I had a specialty. You would have no idea that there was some things that I did better than others, because I did so many of them just to create revenue, just to create activity. Obviously, keeping active in a sales job is important, but I remember looking at that schedule and thinking, what is it that I do? Who do I want to meet with? Do I want to meet with recent college graduates? Do I want to meet with business owners? Do I want to meet with retirees? Who do I want to meet with? because if you look at my schedule, you got no idea what I'm good at.
Right.
And so it was at that point I said to myself, I've got to go deep with one market, with one thing that I'm good at, and just do it over and over and over.
Let me ask you a question, Steve. I've trained hundreds of guys. I've seen maybe even thousands come and go over my career in the financial services industry. And what I found, and tell me if this resonates at all with you, what I found was the guys who weren't having these breakout moments, part of it was they weren't finding what they loved to do. But what I found in my experience, the people who weren't taking it to that next level, there was an underlying issue, whether it was belief in themselves, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of what people might think. Can you speak to your experience for those new guys out there, for those guys that are stuck? Can you speak to that? Something was keeping you from stepping into it. You mentioned, the activities you were doing weren't profit-generating activities at times, or they weren't the types of things that you wanted to be profitable in. Tell me what stories were going through your mind and what was an underlying issue that was holding you back.
Yeah, a great question. I think to answer your question, when I looked at my day, when I looked at my career, when I looked at my job description, when I looked at my activity, what I loved to do wasn't the most lucrative. It wasn't the stuff that I had been conditioned to run for with regard to commission or pay or what have you. So I think something that kept me from being from chasing that sweet spot was the fact that I didn't really think that it was the most lucrative thing. And so if it wasn't the most lucrative thing, and in the position I was in, I had to go after the money. I had to go after the activity that would pay me the most, even though it was something I liked the least. And so that was a big story in my thought process, in that if it didn't pay off now, it wasn't worth it.
Gotcha.
Did
you have any fear? What were the fears that you had about that stage of your life? What stories were you telling?
Yeah, lots of fears. I had the luxury of finding some modest success in my college internship and in the first few years of my career. And so the thought that if I abandoned what had made me successful, at least on paper, and on the newsletters and on the websites, that people might look at me and say, "Are you kidding me? Look at what you did. What are you doing now? What have you made of yourself?" And so there was a huge tendency to not want to disappoint people, whether it be colleagues or managers or even family members. And so the ability, my desire to not disappoint anybody just kept me doing the things that everybody said I should do and everybody said I was good at, even though I really didn't feel that way down deep.
Interesting. You bring me back to a thought back when I was with you, when we started off together with a large insurance and financial services company. We were kind of told just to work with our natural market, and being a 23-year-old guy, that was to work with other 23-year-olds. And I found out pretty quickly they aren't very fun to work with. You're working at night, you're working till 10 o'clock, and people in that marketplace, which I refer to as night work. I mean, if you're doing night work, you're working with night people, and night people weren't profitable. They were a pain in the ass. They didn't keep appointments. It was a lot of work. I mean, it was tough work. And you talk about this recidivism rate being as high as it was, 95% fail rate. I was panicked. I'm like, it's this hard, and I have a 95% chance of failing. Like, this isn't worth it,
exactly.
So I thought to myself, if I'm going to keep doing this, I've got to be into a better marketplace. I want to do something that I can have fun at and have more success. And so we had in our system, Steve, you'll remember this, we had like this one card system. And I would walk by all of the guys in the bullpen or in the cubicles or those who had offices. They'd have these stacks, sometimes a foot, 2 feet high, of these one card, like recipe cards of all of the referrals they have. And the taller that stack got, the more comfortable they seemed to be, the less the referrals they'd go get. My point is this. My stack was about a foot high, and I was so sick and tired of calling those people, I thought, I've got to improve my marketplace, or in this case, I wanted to find a sweet spot. So I threw away all of my cards, against the wishes of my manager, my mentor, and everyone in the office. Like, what are you doing, But I forced myself to go look for new referrals. I forced myself to go look for new people. And it took me like 3 or 4 months of not getting paid to kind of get that ball moving again. But once I did, now 100% of my activities were in the day working with daytime people. And that was a total home run for me. And that was the first time I really started making money and getting really noticed for my ability to close bigger business. Because like you, as an intern doing night work, I had moderate success, but they were in areas that weren't profit driving activities. So I'll never forget that for me. I'll never forget just changing that mindset and stepping into it and working with people that I enjoyed. And that's how I spent the rest of my career, of moving up marketplaces. And the marketplaces were dictated by the products or the different things I wanted to sell, whether it was tax planning strategies or retirement planning strategies. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about next. I'll never forget, Steve, you and I talking by phone, both of us being pretty frustrated about where we were at in our careers. We had both had tons of success. I mean, for heaven's sakes, you've had 5 to 7 planes, if I can count right. I mean, how many have you had?
Yeah, I think it's about 6 or 8, but don't tell my wife that.
What's interesting is I remember your very first plane. You drove me up to Logan, Utah. And it was, what was the name of that? Something Kit. It was a...
Kit Fox. It was a
Kit Fox.
Tiny little 2-seater. Yeah.
Tiny little 2-seater. And we cruised the rivers of the banks of the Bear River, pretending that we were some like World War II, fighting jet.
Exactly.
And
that was my escape.
That was your escape. And since then, you own your own hangars. You've got multiple planes. I mean, you've had a lot of success. So my point is, I had my success, you had yours, we're sitting there, and we're both frustrated again. And you said the most interesting thing to me. You're a financial advisor, and you say to me, Chad, I hate working with people. I mean, you love people, but that part of the business wasn't what you enjoyed the most. You didn't want to sell anymore. You didn't want to have to, there was a lot of work with servicing and stuff. I know that you loved your clients. I know that you did a tremendous job building the book of business that you had, but you got to a place where that wasn't where you wanted to spend your time. And if anyone knows anything about sales, you've got to be in front of people,
Yeah, exactly.
So you had an interesting dilemma, and I'll never forget. It was a very memorable part of my career as well, because I had just made the decision myself to sell my practice and step into what I'm doing today, which is creating, the Challenge and Choose platform. But your dilemma was, I love to do the back office stuff, the planning, the strategizing, the building, the brains behind everything, the brawn in the planning aspect. That's where your passion was, which kind of leads us to where you're at today. I mean, you've got a best-selling book, The Bucket Bliss. You've got this tremendous platform with The Last Advisor. And we're going to go to break, Steve. When we come back, I would like you to kind of talk to us on how you come to this realization and give up a very profitable business to start something different. So hang out with
Great.
us. Hang out with us. Stay tuned, Challenge and Choose listeners. We're going to break, and we're going to come back with Steve Swenson.
Can a wisecracking, 1,000-year-old parrot, a girl grieving her mother, and a boy missing his father save two worlds? In the new fantasy thriller Whip-Eye, Samantha and Jake have 24 hours to face their greatest fears and find out if the supernatural staff, Whip-Eye, can defeat an ancient evil guardian. Chased by monsters and unsure who to trust, can Samantha and Jake learn to trust each other? This fast-paced adventure is about trusting yourself, protecting others, and discovering the beauty of nature. Over 100 different species of wild animals are mentioned. Whip-Eye is a unique blend of magical creatures and wildlife. A surprise-filled story that will appeal to readers of all ages. Watch the Whip-Eye book trailer on YouTube. Whip-Eye, book 1 of the Whip-Eye Chronicles by Jeffrey Sine, getting great reviews everywhere. Whip-Eye at Amazon.com.
Here we go. Welcome back, Challenge and Choose Nation. Thank you for joining us today. Of course, we're still focusing on this series of what it takes to become a 1%er in business. So all you salesmen out there, all of you running small businesses, pay attention to these shows. Listen to them, re-listen to them. We know we can get you to that next level no matter where you're at. We can get you to that next level. And today, one of my favorite people in the world, Steve Swenson, is our guest. Steve, so lead us into this. You stepped into what you didn't like about your business, and you're one of the rare people, which is what makes you a 1%er, to have the courage, the balls, if you will, to step into exactly what your genius is. And I want people to really appreciate the things that you enjoy doing the most are not the profit-generating activities that are, required to make big sales. You have to be in front of people, do the service, get the referrals. But you said, you know what? I'm gonna build something, and I'm gonna be even more profitable because I'm gonna be doing what I love. So, with that being said, lead us into Bucket Bliss, this wonderful little book that I love to death, and this platform of yours, The Last Advisor.
Great. Well, I'll tell you. Bucket Bliss is my spin on a fairly well known and long time tried and true strategy built on a bucket approach. Namely, the approach is that if an advisor or an investor takes their lump sum of assets and divides it up into 4 different buckets, each with a different time frame for use, it provides a framework for the advisor to make recommendations, and it provides safety for the clients based on their risk profile. So, for example, in essence, any money that you spend in the very near term is invested very conservatively so that it can produce safe, steady, secure income. Any money that you're going to spend in 10, 15, or 20 years is invested very differently. You need some growth, and so you take a little bit more risk with that. Well, I had this client who retired in June of 2008. Little did he know that just around the corner was the worst month in stock market history, October of 2008. And because we had implemented this strategy, because we had broken his assets up into different buckets, obviously he was affected by the market downturn of 2008 in the later buckets, but all of the money that he was spending in the next 5 or 10 years was isolated from that volatility. So when I saw that, and when I saw that client come through 2008, calm, cool, and collected, I said to myself, I have got to share that story. I have got to tell other people about this. And so that really provided the spark really for me to go on a hunt for software and illustrations and tools that would help me educate that type of client, the retiree, the guy that has saved for 40 years and now needs to make that asset base last for another 30. I had to find a way to show clients how that worked. Because when I showed it to them,
So, Steve, I got to address this. I was there. I was in the business. I saw it. People who were looking to retire within the next handful of years, or people who were retiring, and heaven forbid, the people in retirement. When that happened, there were some pretty grim stories that came out of that. People who had to go back to work. People who had to end up working another 10 years in some cases because of their lack of advice or lack of implementation, or just being their exposure just being improper. And that's the one of the essences that I love about what you're doing is people just don't understand that what that impact is on your life when you lose 20, 15, 10% or more of your portfolio just due to the exposure of what you're in.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And so when I saw that, I realized I had to tell that story, because it really brought up some passion in my life. It really gave me something to talk about that people just listening to they would buy into. They would get it because they were right there. Well, at that point in my life, again, I had been in the business now 10 plus years, and I only had a few clients that were at that stage of the game. I only had a few clients looking at retirement because I'd been working all those nights with my natural market. And so that's when I decided, listen, I know it's going to be hard. I know it might be expensive, but I have got to take this market. I've got to take this story, and I've got to just tell it as much as I can and see as many people in that space as I can. Now, again, keep in mind, I didn't really love meeting with people, but when I told them a story that I was passionate about, it changed from making a sale and being all things to all people to talking about something I loved. And so that's when I went deep with that market. And what I found out is that as people saw that story and they saw that passion and they saw the results of what I was now doing very good, then they started to talk about me. Then I started to be introduced to not just my natural market, but other people that were retiring, other people that worked with these few clients. And then it really turned into a bonanza for me, because I was now in a very different type of market, one in which I enjoyed talking to, but it allowed me to do what I do best, and it allowed me to do it more and more, namely doing the planning of taking this lump sum of assets and breaking it up into 4 different buckets and making recommendations and watching them click. People were now talking about me and what I did like I always thought they would, but they never could, because I wasn't giving them anything of value. I was trying to be all things to all people.
You know,
that was a big time in my life. It was that was a watershed moment.
That's a huge story that I really want people to understand. And again, if you've heard our previous episodes in this series, you talked about one thing that just is ringing out loud to me personally, because I teach this stuff. But you believed in something. Your belief, because of your passion in a concept, is what drove your activity. So thoughts lead to our behaviors, which lead to our results. Your mindset changed on what you wanted to talk about, and you believe so much in that concept that now you're probably getting more uncomfortable. You're in spaces now that have to match what you're wanting to teach, which is retirees, people looking to retire or people in retirement. And what I find so interesting about this, Steve, I'm imagining your work ethic didn't change a ton. It's just your activities changed, who you were talking to, who you were calling in the story. So in other words, when you believe something, your behaviors match that level of belief. And as a result, of course, our results change.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now my market all of a sudden changed to folks that were 65 years old. Now, not only were they 65-year-old blue-collar workers that had contributed to 401ks all their life, but my market really switched, interestingly, to retiring university professors, guys that were masters in their own discipline, experts in their own field, but needed a little help with their finances. And so I'll never remember walking into an appointment to a guy that I knew at the university I was at. I knew he was a renowned economist, double PhD, and I have to admit I was a little nervous going in here, because what could a 32? I was in my late 30s now. What could I share with this guy that was 30 years my elder, double PhD in economics and finance? What could I do? And so
right.
I was scared,
especially in that
there,
industry, especially being that's hilarious.
Yeah. So when I went in there and told him the story, when I told him how I would do this and why I would do it, I saw the light flip on. And again, I knew when I was looking across the desk at a gray-haired expert, double PhD, finance econ guy that traveled the world consulting, and he got it. He lit up. It was that was a great feeling. He bought in, and not only did he buy in, but he also started talking about it to his colleagues and his associates. I used the example that what do you do when you see a good movie, or when you have a good steak? Something that's just absolutely amazing. I can't stop talking about it.
Right.
In fact, I have this habit when my wife makes something, whether it's for dinner or dessert, when she makes something, I talk all the way through it. When it's so good, I just can't shut up.
You want to share it with the world.
Yeah. So, for example, she makes this apple cake, and this apple cake comes with a syrup made out of butter, evaporated milk, a bunch of other good stuff. I'm sure there's plenty of sugar in it. In fact, it's my favorite dessert. Favorite dessert. She doesn't even have to ask anymore, what kind of cake you want for your birthday. It's this apple cake. Now, if you could see me right now trying to explain this apple cake to you, dude, I'm telling you, when you taste that warm syrup, your eyes literally roll to the back of your head, and you search for words that you don't know what they are, just so that you can tell somebody how good it is. It's the funniest dang thing. My kids just look at me as I eat it, and they think, this little boy's crazy.
I need a cold shower just hearing you talk about it.
You need some of this cake, buddy. Well, listen, I don't want to get us too far off track, but this strategy that I found, bucket bliss, it was like that cake for my clients. It was like that cake. They could not stop talking about it. So all of a sudden, they were having conversations now with their colleagues, with their associates, with their neighbors, with their walking friends about the strategy, about the confidence they now had that their money would last as long as their life. And so that was big. That was big. Now, one thing I don't want to miss here is that the development of the illustrations, the development and refinement of the strategy, that's what I did best. I always did that good. I always enjoyed that more than anything else, even in the early days of my career. And so when I found that I could take that and talk to people that I liked and that liked hearing it and that really benefited from it, when I saw that I was making a difference in these people's lives. And again, it had everything to do with that one client that retired in July of 2008, and then the market came unglued. To see that contentment, to see that peace, to see them safely tucked in bed and not doing what everybody was doing at the time, which was moving the cash and missing the run that would inevitably follow. When I saw that and had that story, I can't not talk about that experience without feeling like I'm eating some apple cake.
I love it, man. I told you a minute ago, I needed a cold shower after hearing your description of that. Unbelievable, and it's a point well made, Steve. It's a super good point of, again, today's episode. We're dedicating it to finding that sweet spot, finding your passion. If you're going to take it from the 20% to the 5%, your activities, the people that you're surrounding yourself with, have to be the activities that support being a 5%er. And for you, Steve, what you found was your natural market wasn't going to get you there. That wasn't what your message was about. So all of your activities one day are natural market and people you don't necessarily want to be around. And then by changing your mindset, changing your belief, creating new behaviors, next thing you know, you're doing what you love, which is sharing this story about diversification and the different buckets. And now all of your marketplace are experts in their field, which is intimidating to a lot of people. But for you, the intimidation factor goes away because you're passionate, because you know that you're going to be able to help them if they'll just give you a moment to listen, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now listen, my journey is only halfway done, because here I am finding myself much more comfortable, making a much better living, changing, again, not to sound corny, but changing people's lives. Because if you could just see them walk into my office with concern and leave with peace, you knew I was changing lives. But I'll tell you what, now you mentioned the platform that I've created called Last Advisor. Now, it's a platform where I really packaged up the software that I created, the stories that I tell, the book that I wrote, the marketing material that I used to attract and facilitate referrals from this market. I packaged it all up, and now what I do is coach other advisors on the strategy. So check this out, how I went from talking to you in the parking lot on our cell phones saying I hate this, to creating something within my skill set and within the career and within the job that I had, within the resources that I had, creating something that I can now talk about all day long with advisors, not to mention the select few clients that I still service. So my job changed when I looked for that thing I loved. Even though I didn't change jobs.
Yeah, you didn't change anything. And I think what I really want our listeners to really feel in this moment, because I lived this with you, the activity you're doing is not income generating. And that's what's so interesting is a lot of people will say to themselves, I can't work in my genius quality because my clients need X, Y, and Z. There was a local guy who hired me here, Steve, with a big wirehouse. And when he talks about doing individual stocks, his face lights up like the apple cake that you're talking about. I mean, it's all he wants to talk about. In other words, I have to get him to shut up because he loves talking about it. But he believes, to your point, he needs to be all things to his clients. You know, his clients are going to need, mutual funds. They're going to need this. They're going to need that. And you could tell that when he talks about the life insurance part, when he talks about, building, annuities and mutual fund portfolios, you could tell it's just a drag. And I tried to help him understand, if you just focused on that one sweet spot, in his mind, well, I can't just make money doing that. I'm like, what do you mean you can't? So there's the story. So the story is, again, to become a 1%er, we have to listen to our stories. And Steve, you can appreciate this guy's story was, I have to be all things to all people. The other story was, well, I can't just focus on one thing. And then he had lots of reasons why. Those are the stories. This is what we're talking about at Challenge and Choose. If you want to get to your sweet spot, if you want to become a 1%er, you have to you have to find your niche. You got to find that passion. Everything else will follow. And Steve Swenson is a perfect example of this. For him to say, I'm going to do what I'm passionate about, basically said, I'm going to sit in the office and I'm going to build and strategize and build these intense planning models, but who am I going to give it to? I don't want to work with people. I want to do this. But you did it. You built a platform to sell to other advisors. That's the genius of this. So there's no story that can't come true is what I'm really ultimately saying. Whatever your passion is within your industry, if you're the best at that, there's a market for that. Everyone has their thing.
You're making a very good point. I think if you were to ask somebody, what are they passionate about? They might say golf or flying or some other hobby. And they might think to themselves, well, in order for me to have a job that I love and that's productive and that fills my life, not with just money, but with enjoyment, I've got to do something like that. Well, listen, if you would have told me to go and chase my dream, well, I'd be sitting out at the hangar looking at airplanes, sucking on cold Diet Cokes. I mean, and that's not productive. But I had to find something within the job that I had that I loved. And so this all of a sudden became my passion. I don't know if I've done a good job of explaining that, but I don't want your listeners to mistake passion for something outside of their job, outside of their industry, outside of their training. Don't mistake your passion with your hobby, because I would have never gotten here if I would have thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
Would you speak to the idea of every time in your career when you developed or sharpened or fine-tuned these passions at work? I mean, I know your story. That gave you the opportunity to spend more time in your outside of work interest. The more time you get to fly, the more time you get to do the things that just give you the greatest joy in the world. Spending time with your children and your wife. I mean, you got more time to do the other things, which that's why we do these things. If you're doing what you're passionate about, work doesn't feel like work. And ultimately, it gives you more time and more resources to do the other things that bring you joy and passion.
Yeah, let's go back to where I was meeting more and more university professors. Well, university professors had former colleagues that moved to other universities. They had former classmates in grad school that they've kept in touch with. And so I all of a sudden started to be bounced around the country to different universities. Well, that just lended itself so well to flying myself there. And so not only now would I be able to go and see a prospect that was highly qualified and came highly referred and was very interested in the strategy, but I was able to fly myself there and enjoy that passion while I did it. Well, that hasn't changed since I've moved to selling the platform to other advisors, because I now get to see other advisors throughout the country and fly myself there. And so you're exactly right. As I pursued my passion at work, it gave me time and freedom to pursue my hobbies and my passions outside of work.
Interesting.
Yeah, very good point.
Tremendous story. And to your point, I think we do want to teach people to find your passion within your industry. Obviously, if you hate your industry, Steve and I would agree. Go find what you're truly passionate about. There's no limit to what you can accomplish. But like Steve, I know so many people who are really good at what they do. They just needed to find that niche within what they're doing, and their lives changed forever. I've got dozens of stories, dozens and dozens that we don't have time for today, which leads me to we got a break coming up here. Let's stop with Steve Swenson here for a moment, and let's go to break, and we'll come back. Stay tuned.
Well, I finally did it. My student loan is totally paid off.
What? What about our plan to win the lottery and start living? You know, travel the world on matching yachts, wear enough jewelry to require a bodyguard, vacation on the French Riviera, and then buy it.
You know we're never going to win the lottery, right?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
So here we are. We're back with Steve Swenson. Stars, Steve. We were kind of talking off the air there. We're live, Challenge and Choose Nation. Thanks for staying tuned in. Again, we've got Steve Swenson here with us today. We're talking to you 1%ers, or you want to be 1%ers. We got producer Jake here. Jake, you learning some stuff?
Always learn a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff.
So we're talking about finding that sweet spot, finding that passion. Steve, kind of lead us into what your life looks like today.
Well, we've done a lot of talking about me and some of these watershed moments in my life. I think if your listeners are picking up on my story, none of this would have been possible had I not had the dialogue with you through all the years about challenging my beliefs and choosing a different way or choosing to change it. So I can't go any further without really talking about the things you taught me and the things that you talked me through as you were really developing this challenge and choose model. Had I not challenged, had I not chosen, I would still be talking to my natural market, being all things to all people. And I think that's, again, I can't give you enough credit for again, lighting the fire within.
I appreciate that. Could you speak to any of those moments, or maybe some specifics to that, on what impacted you the most? What was the most, for you, in your story? Everyone kind of picks and chooses what they learn from things. What impact did I have and my model have on you the most?
Well, I'll tell you, I remember a time you stopped by my office and you told me about what you were doing. And again, I was still kind of just tossing and turning, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But I remember as we sat there, and I don't know if I should tell people that you were in shorts and flip-flops when you rolled into my office, and you told me what you were doing. A huge light went on in my mind. You had taken some hardcore beliefs that were right inside you and just challenged them. I mean, I'm not talking just business. I'm talking life. You just said to me what you were thinking. You just said to me some ideas that you had. You were challenging these beliefs that we were always just conditioned to follow. And you chose a big life change when you created Challenge and Choose, when you moved to Austin, when you did all this. And so, the skills that you taught me to just look at your life, to just look where you are and answer and ask one question. I remember when you asked me one question that I'll never forget. You said, "Who are you?" You asked me, "Who are you? Who is Steve Swenson?" And oh my gosh, I had spent so many years telling prospects, telling family members, telling other people in my life who I thought they wanted me to be, that when you asked me, "Who are you?" I really didn't have an answer. And so that began a long dialogue that you and I had about finding who I was. And we got there by eliminating this guy or eliminating that guy. He's not him. He's not this guy. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. And slowly, if you can picture, I remember you talking to me about a pendulum that was swinging back and forth. I was swinging back and forth between who I thought I was and who other people thought I was. Mm-hmm. And in reality, I was really something in the middle. And when I found who I was, again, not to be too touchy-feely here, but when I found who I was and what I wanted, then I was able to really clear my head of all the noise and focus on this story that I've told you, this story that changed my career, because that's really what was important. It wasn't being at the top of the leaderboard. It wasn't being in a certain client builder group. It wasn't about that. It was about doing something that I was passionate about. And so now if you ask, who are you? I have an answer. I know who I am. I know where I'm going. And I didn't always know that, in spite of the fact that I was, I was nearly 40 years old when you asked that question.
I can appreciate that. And I think a lot of people out there can relate to that. And me being one of them, Steve, I was just, a month ahead of you in my process. And I was always really flattered that you took any of my advice, because you were always kind of a hero of mine on what you were doing. And together we just seemed to really, brainstorm and kind of we knew how to light each other's fires. But I really appreciate your vote of confidence, and I'm proud of the impact that I was able to have in your life, because you've done miraculous things.
It was huge, bro.
So if you were to give advice to people in business, let's say both of us have some acumen in the financial services industry, where do you think Challenge and Choose can have the most impact with people in that industry?
Well, in the financial services industry, that's a really easy question for me to answer, because I went through the process with you. And it has everything to do with, again, challenging what everybody wants you to do and choosing to do what you want to do. From an activity standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, from a life standpoint. But I think that those same characteristics, those same lessons are equally as applicable outside of the financial services industry, outside of even the sales industry. Outside of if you have to meet with people. I think business owners can use those techniques to sell more widgets, if you will, whatever those widgets are. Now, I think an even greater appeal has to do with just the average Joe who wants to be above average, not just in business, but in life. Because that question you asked me about who are you was as life changing as in my personal life as it was in my career. And so the things that you teach with the Challenge and Choose process are universally applicable. And that's the beauty of it, is that you're not, the things that you've created are not just for one niche, one market, one industry. They're applicable everywhere because they truly are life skills.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Steve. I mean, it's a great plug. It's very flattering to hear you say that. For me, when I developed Challenge and Choose, it was for business. It was to develop monetary wealth. It was to be successful. And when I had that light came on that day, when I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to apply this to my marriage, my parenting, like all of my life, it applies to everything. It is universal. And what I find is I typically get hired via businesses, and it turns personal real fast. In other words, people are asking for more advice personally with relationships and dreaming and living in their essence, their genius qualities, their tip of the spear of their passions. The people that can buy into that are the ones that are really living a life of bliss, which is really what I want everyone to achieve, is living a life of bliss. The Challenge and Choose system can help in any model, and I really appreciate you plugging that, because the impact it's had on my personal life is far greater than the monetary success I've gained from it. And I'd like to say that I am a 1%er on both ends, and that feels really good to be in that space. Because the essence, I want you to speak to this briefly, and I want to hear more about I want to give more people an opportunity to learn about where they can find Bucket Bliss and The Last Advisor. But I want to get one buy-off on you, Steve. When you're in that space, when you're in that genius, when you first hit it to the point now, would you agree that being a 10%er, being a 5%er, being a 1%, it's easier. The higher you go, the easier it is, the funner it is, and the more money you make, the more freedom you have. It's kind of like you can't afford not to do this because it's so much work being an 80%er. And unfortunately, more people are in that than any other space. There's so few people. That's why they call it the 1%ers, right? There's only 1% of everyone there. And those are the people who get to live life to the fullest. And what people in the 80% and 20% don't understand is it's exponentially easier. It's easier.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. In fact, it's the one thing that I think is the hardest thing to get people to believe. Is that in fact now my life is easier, meaning my activity hasn't changed a bit, but I enjoy the activity more, and it just is not as much work. Now, I know that just sounds so crazy, and it sounds so counterintuitive, but it really is. People just have to trust you on that. They just have to trust me on that. That is the way it works. When you find your genius, when you work inside of it, when you do the things you love more often than not, it just feels better. It just feels better. It just is easier. Everything comes together. And again, I don't know, I guess if anybody can pick anything up from our interview, it would be that point. It would be that there were times where I really had to sit and make a decision or challenge a belief. But once I started down the path, it was almost like it was the wind was at my back, because everything came so much easier when I was running that direction.
And you were having funner doing it, which is part of the...
Oh, absolutely.
That's the genius behind it. Well, Steve, where can we find Bucket Bliss?
Well, listen, it's as I mentioned, or maybe I hadn't mentioned it. I was pleasantly surprised that the book Bucket Bliss, and a little story about a big retirement idea, hit the bestseller list at Amazon shortly after it was released. So you can go buy the hard copy or the Kindle version at Amazon. You can also get the Barnes & Noble Nook version at barnesandnoble.com. And then lastly, if you're using an iPad and want to read it on the iBook application, it's available at the Apple Store, the bookstore. So you can get it there, and it's a great read. If I do say so myself, it's a story, kind of a parable that by the time you're at the end of the book, the story has kept the pages turning, but you realize you've learned a little finance at the end.
Absolutely.
It's also a very short read. As you know, Chad, I've got a very, very short attention span, so I couldn't write anything more than 130 pages. It took longer than an hour to read. So,
that's awesome.
But, yeah, you can get it there, and but I appreciate this opportunity to talk about it and to talk about the decisions that you helped me make to get here.
Well, I appreciate that. If you don't mind, Steve, I'm going to read. I got the first copy of Bucket Bliss, a little story about a big retirement idea, which I just love. It's the coolest cover I've ever seen on a book. But if you don't mind me, I'm going to share what you wrote in the first edition, first copy. It says, Chad.
First copy, first edition, buddy.
Attaboy. It says, Chad, I challenged, I chose. Thank you, brother. Steve Swinson. That meant a lot to me, Steve, and I actually keep this on the mantle or the table next to my bed, and every night I just kind of breeze through it. It's motivating to me because you're a person who you're doing it, you're living your truth, you're living your passion. You've become a very authentic person. You know what you want out of life, and I could see your life changed, not just professionally, but but personally. And I think that's what I want from everyone that I meet, is to be able to change all of their life. And so thank you for being a part of my life, and we appreciate you having us as a guest today. Again, you can go out and find Bucket Bliss on Amazon. Steve Swenson's the author. He's our guest today. For those of you who are Challenge and Choose fans or want to know more, check us out at challengeandchoose.com. Check us out on Challenge and Choose Radio Network, and check us out on Facebook and Twitter. We want to hear the impact we're having in your life. We want you to give us the feedback. Shoot us out some tweets. Find us on Facebook and let us know how you're enjoying our program. We appreciate you listening to us today. We appreciate Steve Swenson taking time out of his busy schedule. Happy holidays to you and yours, Steve. We wish you the very best.
Hey, thanks a million, Chad. Thank you.
Absolutely. And will you come back on?
Absolutely.
I'd like to bring you back next year and see how 2015 is shaping up for you.
Perfect.
Okay, before we sign you off, Steve, every guest we have, we want them to set a big goal. What's your big goal for 2015? And we're going to bring you back on to talk about how you did it. What's your big goal?
All right.
What comes to mind?
Big goal. Big goal is, and again, don't laugh, but it's going to be $1.5 million of revenue, or not revenue, but profit in the practice and in the Last Advisor business.
Awesome. We love it. Love the big visions. We're going to hold you to it, and we're going to help you out in any way we can. Thank you, Steve, for joining us today. Thank you, Challenge and Choose Nation, for joining in. My name's Chad Butler, your host. We're signing out. Thank you.
You have just listened to the Challenge and Choose Radio Network. For more information on these topics and the Challenge and Choose programs, please check out www.challengeandchoose.com.